Hours before these new retaliatory tariffs came out from China this morning, the Trump administration had privately warned Chinese officials of two things. First of all, not to retaliate, which we heard from Trump time and time again over the last few weeks, but also that China should be requesting a phone call between President Trump and President Xi. China has not done that so far. They've been telling China to do this for months now, according to a source familiar with that working level dialogue between the two sides. We know that Xi and Trump spoke before inauguration. They haven't had a conversation as this trade war has escalated. And senior White House officials tell Elena Trine that Trump is waiting for Xi to make the first move here. He thinks the onus is on the Chinese leader to do so. But when you talk to folks, there's a fundamental disagreement about how this could all come together. And that is one of the challenges, as there is this remaining question, an urgent question really, as to how they're going to create an off-ramp for this escalating trade war.
Here is where the trade war stands right now. 145 going up against 125. These are the tariffs between the world's two biggest economies.
And here's another number, 4,700 or about $400 per month. That is how much more money Yale's now estimating, the Yale Budget Lab, that President Trump's tariffs are going to cost average households each year. And with just hours left in trading, the Dow right now up. You're seeing that swing here going into the afternoon, up almost 650 points. But it was up and down there throughout earlier in the day. With us now, we have CNN business editor-at-large Richard Quest. We have CNN chief national security analyst Jim Sciutto as well. Richard, a key economic gauge, the consumer sentiment now at its second lowest level on record, going back to 1952. Why?
We shouldn't be surprised with all that's coming out and all the worries about tariffs. It's not just that, it's the complexity of everything else as well. The changes within the federal government, the worries about job losses, the worries about a slowing economy, higher inflation, and eventually you get these what's known as soft data. They're surveys like the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment, and it's a really worrying number because at some point these sentiment surveys feed into hard data of real consumer spending. And we know this from history and precedent. That's what happens. So when we see a number as bad as this one, it is only a matter of time, unless anything else changes that would suddenly make people more cheerful. Look at that chart. I mean, just look at it. Unless people suddenly become more cheerful, why would this not translate into spending? You see, that consumer lab, the lab from Yale, that number of 4,700, that is providing you don't start substituting goods. In other words, pre-substitution, if we just continue as we are now. But of course, people will start to substitute. They will find other goods. And as the Christmas Tree Association said a moment or two ago, it's going to be very difficult to find substitution of many things that we currently get from China.
Yeah, you'll be surprised just how much we get exclusively from China. And Jim, I'm really curious to get your perspective on the White House's handling of this situation. Not so much the tariffs that have been announced, but this reporting that the White House, that officials have made clear to Beijing that they want Xi to ask for a call with Trump. Yeah. Trump hasn't reached out directly. What do you make of that approach?
And the White House saying they want Xi to reach out for it. Can you get any more high school in matters of state? It's ridiculous.
He's got to call me, Jim.
Yeah, and listen, what's interesting is, as I was reporting yesterday, the Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels to allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, you know, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. It's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, et cetera. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145% U.S., China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is, but it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
You're seeing some members of Congress grow concerned about the impacts this economic situation could have as we move closer to the 2026 midterms. I know we just finished the November elections, but already those are underway with primary fights and eventually a contested race for the House and for some of these tight Senate races. So I think it's really going to be, as Vaughn was saying, as the months go by and this trade war really starts to hit Americans' bottom line, that's where we might see the president start to feel some real pressure. But so far, he has had a greater appetite for risk when it comes to markets than I think a lot of even some of his supporters anticipated.
Tyler, it is a Friday at the end of a very long week. I am not ready to hear the word election right now. It's okay. Shannon, but I want to talk to you about the flip side of this, because the impact on China, despite Xi saying, he's not afraid, a full-blown trade war with the U.S. means being shut out of the world's biggest consumer market. The Chinese economy is tailored to sell cheap goods to China. So is it possible that with enough prolonged pressure, we actually see China blink and come to the negotiating table?
Definitely going to hit the Chinese economy. And already they were having serious domestic problems in their real estate markets with their own domestic consumption. And we've seen over the last year a huge surge of exports out to the world precisely to revive the Chinese economy or give it sort of a boost. So this cuts out one of its biggest markets. But as I said before, China has started to move away from the United States as its main source or location for where it sends its goods. It started to focus on other markets. And I do think we will see it double down on that, looking at all kinds of markets around the world, whether that's the European Union, whether that's Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, other places. They will double down on those efforts. Now, they won't be able to make up for the U.S. market, assuming these tariffs stay there. It will be a big hit to China. But we also there have a political system that is all aligned behind Xi. So he does have the flexibility and the ability to handle the political pain. He, unlike the Republicans, will not face elections most likely in 2026.
In matters of state, it's ridiculous.
He's got to call me, Jim.
Yeah, and listen, what's interesting is, as I was reporting yesterday, the Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels to allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. It's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day, because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, et cetera. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145% U.S., China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is, but it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
You've lived in China. Mm-hmm. You've covered China for some time now. As we're looking at this question of who's going to blink first, with two very different political systems, what is your gauge on this?
Well, different systems, listen, one's a democracy, one is not. One's a single-party state, very much not a democracy. But China does have politics, and Chinese leaders do not want to be seen, we were talking about this yesterday, I believe, do not want to be seen as capitulating to America. That is not good politics for a Chinese leader. Long colonial history to go back into, we could talk for hours, but they don't want to be seen as kowtowing to the West here. So the browbeating is not a great diplomatic strategy. And we've seen that in the past as well. Now, we should say Donald Trump mixes in with the tariff browbeating some comments about how good a friend he is with Xi. But we'll see if the door has been closed for now, or if there's a little bit of an opening and perhaps they start opening those channels.
Richard, it's interesting to explore the power that the EU has now, because they can tip the scales in terms of how impactful these tariffs will be for either nation, depending on where negotiations land.
So you've got the Spanish Prime Minister in Beijing. You've got the EU basically saying, well, we're going to start looking at other markets. I think this will most certainly give a huge boost to China-EU relations to try and complete some form of trade agreement, because everybody is now wanting to circumnavigate the United States. Now, you can't up to a point. There are certain things, there are certain inalienable bonds of trade between the EU and the US. That doesn't mean to say you can't reduce it, your reliance. And just as much as the US is now saying, we want to reduce our reliance on China, we want to make sure we are no longer strategically dependent. The EU absolutely is saying, is there a deal to be done with Brazil and Mercosur? Is there a deal to be done with ASEAN, a stronger one? Jim, can I just ask Jim, do you think, sorry guys, but do you think that the Xi statement is actually a sort of not a white flag, but just a sort of an olive branch that both sides can now take to move forward?
I think it has two sides to it. One, it's a bit of a message to the U.S. to say, this is silly. This is getting silly. We're not going to play this game of chicken. But Xi Jinping, also by not going right up to the level of U.S. tariffs, I think one can look at that as a small opening for discussions. Both of them want to talk. Now the question is, I suppose, who picks up the phone first? That's where we are.
You see, Boris, Brianna, that's what happens when you get two anchors who are also your guests. We'll just hijack the whole thing.
He did it, by the way, just so you know. I only answered.
No objections here over who calls who first or who asks what question.
We're all friends.
It's a fun conversation, and we appreciate it. Richard Quest, Jim Sciutto, thank you both.
Trump is losing to China. And look, you don't have to be pro-China. This is, we're anti-China to observe the truth here. You could be perfectly neutral on China. But what Donald has done is given China a new set of, if not friends, then allies of convenience. Because I know what he's trying to do is, I'm going to pause the tariffs on everybody but China. But one, no one trusts him. And two, the pause is really just a reduction to 10%, which is still effectively a global 10% tariff. But we've talked about this on this channel, and you've heard it from other sources as well, that Donald has created a context in which, like I've never seen before, let me know in the comments if you have at least tentative cooperation between China, Japan, and South Korea. 3 countries that, for a whole lot of reasons about modern politics, but also history, going back to World War II especially, but in some cases, thousands, hundreds of years of animosity between these 3 very important countries, 2 of which are big U.S. allies, one is an adversary, but all 3 of them now realize they can't trust the United States. They can't. 2 of them can't trust the United States as an ally, and even just as a pure business, trading partner, China can't trust the United States. So Trump has created the context in which China can emerge as the world trade leader in a way that wasn't possible even 6 weeks ago. Donald, you just ensured China's win.